Welcome to the Green Door Life Elevated Frequency podcast. And my name is Shannon Morse. I'm here with the lovely Lisa Kirby, my co-host and co-founder. And today we're here with a very special guest who's Anne Fischer Silva. And we're very excited about this conversation as we're going to dive into CGM, all things balancing blood sugar levels and so much more. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Shannon. I'm really delighted to be here with you guys.
Beautiful. So I think there's a lot to cover. And as we were saying, this is a big conversation to be going into. And the three of us like to nerd out, which is fun. So, Anne, do you want to give us an idea about your background and kind of like how you came to start moving into looking at continued glucose monitor support and all of this kind of stuff?
I've been in the field of nutrition for a long time, 23 years, and I've worked in various capacities. I've worked in integrative medical clinics, and in those spaces, I was doing 4-hour glucose tolerance tests. So measuring glucose has been kind of in my purview for a very long time. I am now in private practice. My company is Pivotal Health Collective. And I work with a lot of really kind of advanced chronic cases. So I work with a lot of autoimmune, digestive issues, hormonal imbalances, and metabolic issues like diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So that's kind of what my background is. In terms of continuous glucose monitors, I'm really fascinated by longevity and the idea that not only how can we live longer, but how can we be healthier longer? How can we not kind of do that long, slow slide into death? Like my mantra is joy, 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 dead. That's kind of how I want to go. So I think that, we're living in this age of wearables, so like a Fitbit, I've got an Oura ring, I'm looking at sleep, I'm looking at my movement, I'm measuring my heart rate. So continuous glucose monitors is kind of an extension of that. I think if we don't measure it, we can't improve it. And so continuous glucose monitors are a way to really get real-time feedback on how food, stress, alcohol, how all of those things are affecting us.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, I have so many questions. I know Lisa has so many questions too. I just love that we love data, all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Well, it's been so cool because Shannon and I, if anyone has been following us on Instagram stories, we've been wearing a CGM for me, for the first time ever, and sharing some of our experiences, including being woken up at 2 a.m. with like the loudest alarm I've ever heard in my life of like, emergency, your blood sugar is low, which, obviously woke me up and I'm like panicking, like, oh my God.
I thought it was a tornado alarm.
Like, do I need to slug some OJ right now? Like, what's going on? But then, it piques the curiosity in the student in me, and I know in Shannon as well, of like, okay, what does this mean? Like, what does all this data mean? What is this, how do I interpret this? And something that has come up for me personally is just the reminder and the value of like, yes, there's all these wearables and information and data tracking out there, but if you don't have a guide or a mentor or someone to help, like someone who's been there and has the amazing experience that you have, and to help you interpret that information, it can be kind of overload and send you down this rabbit hole of research. And you will find, I'm convinced that you can find any confirmation of anything you believe in ever on the internet. If you believe something about this way of eating is the only way of eating and is good and everything else is bad, like you can find a study that backs that up. So for me, just my first off experience, what has it been like for you and being in this space as a master functional nutritionist and nutritional therapy practitioner of being able to help walk clients through and patients through these processes and helping them understand, okay, what does all this data mean?
Well, I first tried it on myself, so that I could see, how I was responding. And I think that it's important to understand that 80% of the American population is in prediabetes. And, nobody really knows that. And I think the problem is that if you go to your doctor, that you may have a fasting blood sugar done. By the time that becomes dysregulated to the point that you're in prediabetes or even type 2 diabetes, you have gone down a road so far, and I think that the value of a CGM is really stopping that progression early, so you're not joining that statistic, right? So I have developed a way of using it, over a month where you basically are just for the first week, just like, oh, I wonder what this is doing. I'm doing this because it's usually on your arm and you have an app on your phone and it's just so easy. You just point to your arm, there's Shannon's, and you're like, where am I right now? And it's just fascinating to watch what goes on in your body. And I think it's important to look at it throughout the day. So first thing in the morning, how well are you regulated when you're fasting? And then, right before you eat, right after you eat, and watch it. So having done, 4-hour glucose tolerance tests, I sort of know what it should be doing. Now, a CGM is about 15 minutes behind what we would normally see on a glucometer. So glucometer is measuring in the bloodstream, and a CGM is measuring the glucose in the interstitial tissue, which is about a 15-minute lag behind. So that's kind of important to know as well. But we should see, after eating, you should see somewhat of a spike of your glucose go up, but you don't want it to be too high. And then it should kind of level out. And then over the next 3 hours, just slowly come back down to baseline. When people have glucose dysregulations, and there's a million different scenarios for those, a lot of times they'll go way too high and then take way too long to come down. Some people don't go high at all, and in 2 hours they're bottoming out because they're in hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually those people that are like, what can I have now? I want something sweet. They go through those sugar cravings like crazy. So I think understanding your pattern is first and foremost. And then throughout the month, then you can kind of go, okay, now I know that these foods are my triggers. I'm probably not going to want to include those. How can I structure a meal that will keep me well regulated and satiated? And things that kind of slow down that glucose spike would be protein, fiber, and fat. So really kind of looking at all of those things and really mastering for you as an individual what works, because everybody is so different, as you guys have discovered, right? Like Shannon, your experience is different than Lisa's, right?
I believe, yes.
Yes.
After Lisa and I had a little text exchange yesterday, which was Lisa kind of being a little freaked out, not a ton, just a tiny bit, as Anne, because she sent you an email.
Mm-hmm.
And my response was, I don't think that that's severely abnormal. I just think that you're different. And,
Right.
her levels will be in the range for her body. My levels will be in the range for my
That's
body.
right.
And I think that's, it's so helpful because we already have that awareness in terms of nutrition, education, and coaching for the foundations of nutrition and performance nutrition. And then to be able to even really, as you're sharing, and really methodically have this feedback mechanism within a 15-minute gap. It's not that bad, because over time you can just essentially predict what you're going to see and then make adjustments as you go through it. And what I love about that, and it's the same thing when you're tracking food in general, when you have an idea of what range you want to be in,
That's right. Mm-hmm.
that you can even unconsciously begin to make new decisions. And this is what I'm noticing, is that when you snack throughout the day, you're going to have more spikes. But when you allow yourself to have the windows between meals, then you're going to notice that more gradual decline in the natural flow of the glucose release, and then your hormones regulating, and then you're in that fasted state, and then you eat again. But if you're snacking all the time, then it's a little exhausting for the body.
It's exhausting for the body, especially for digestion. Like I'm not a big advocate of snacking. I think our meals should last us a good 3.5 to 4 hours. And we need to like fully empty out the digestive tract before we introduce new food. And that also allows our metabolism to regulate and, really get our blood sugar stable again. So I think that it's such an individual discovery. It's impossible to make recommendations without knowing how people run, because some people, there is kind of a genetic influence to this. People who have a lot of diabetes in their family, I think can run high to begin with. And so if those are people that are eating a lot of carbohydrates, they're going to be high. And it's just really great to recognize that. One of the things, we were talking about conventional medicine and how, when it comes to metabolic dysfunction, it's almost like, they'll check on you. And the ways that we look at this medical diagnosis of diabetes or even prediabetes is that a fasting glucose of 126 or higher is the definition of diabetes, or a hemoglobin A1C, which measures the glycosylated, kind of free radical over a 90-day period of 6.5. But if you're 6.4, they can't tell you that you have a problem. They'll give you some vague dietary guidance, and tell you to come back. Maybe you'll have it next time, right? So that's kind of how conventional medicine approaches these chronic types of concerns. Like when I think about longevity, I'm thinking about kind of the 4 basic and chronic issues that affect most Americans, and that's heart disease, cancer, metabolic issues like diabetes, and neurodegenerative diseases. And the thread that runs through all of those is glycemic control. Mm-hmm. So this is why it's so important to just really dial this in.
I can't agree more.
It's so exciting because, well, Shannon and I both turned 40 in this last year. And, I can personally start to feel just like little shifts in my body. Like one of the things I noticed was needing more rest and recovery after training, which is like shocking to me, which I've never experienced before. And I'm like, okay. And just thinking about the shift for a lot of our clients that we're working with who have been with us over time, where we're starting to think more longer term of like, yes, these are things that help us get fit and feel good in our bodies, but what else, we're just thinking more long-term now of longevity. And like, I want to be strength training when I'm 80, like I think that's what's so cool about the next generations to come is we're training and exercising and eating well for a myriad of different reasons, which is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, I think a lot of people want that, but they'll start tomorrow, right? Like you can't start when you're 70 years old to start caring and go, well, I guess I'm here. I better start regulating myself and moving more and, getting stronger. No, you can't do that. You have to start now. When we talk about neurodegenerative diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's, it's estimated that those start 20 years before the onset of any symptoms. So, it's important that we just realize that we start today, no matter what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I find most fascinating about a CGM or just about glucose in general is how much stress affects our blood sugar. We think about the last meal that we ate, and that makes sense to us, but I can't tell you how many clients I've had that, we did everything. They used the CGM, they dialed in their macros, they were sleeping better, everything. And then this big stressor that they were dealing with, one woman, it was a relationship, and another woman, it was her job, just this chronic stress load that they were both carrying. And it wasn't until those issues resolved that their glucose finally came into regulation. So it's important to recognize how powerful that is. And the reason, if we think about the physiological reason that is, it's because of our adrenal glands. You know, cortisol plays such a strong role in glucose metabolism. So it's not shocking, and yet it is kind of surprising that it has such a powerful influence.
It's such thank you so much for sharing that, because it's such an incredible thing to be able to have something like a monitor like this, where you're able to see it happening in real time and also seeing the trends over an extended period of time. And that's something that we see with our clients show up in the body, you know, having some sort of resistance to dropping body fat, if that's someone's goal, or to build muscle mass, or to feel stronger, or they're more prone to injury when they have these heightened stressors in their life, whether it's relationship or work or moving. But what's interesting as well, and I'm really fascinated about this, and it's kind of a bigger conversation, but just looking at some of the propensity of our chronic diseases in the US and the heightened stress, and also, when I'm kind of going a little bit woo-woo, but also what happens on the news, and the amount of very traumatic and stressful things that we show on the news, and how that responds and how we respond from that internal mechanism of cortisol release. And then how we basically compound that with people who are in that kind of environment, whether it's their home environment or the media environment, and they're taking that in. And something that we say very frequently is that basically we are digesting everything in our environment all the time.
Without a doubt.
It's not necessarily just the food, you know, it's all of the things that are in our life. And then our body is showing us what it thinks about that combination of rest and intake.
Absolutely. You know, the example that I like to give is if you think about how someone lived 150 years ago. You know, so I like to set the stage of, like, you're in Little House on the Prairie, and you know, you look out the window and you see this big storm coming in, and you're like, oh God, I got to get those crops in. And so you feel the stress rising, you know, because there's a lot of pressure there. It's your year long, you know, income that's at stake here. And there's a huge storm coming. So the response to that stress was physical. You had to get out and get that job done. You had to harvest. And historically, that's how stress has always been. It's always required some physicality in response to it, whether something was chasing you or you had to fight or flee, whatever it was, there was always a physical response. Well, fast forward to today, and like, we don't have, you know, saber-toothed tigers chasing us. We don't really even have fight or flight anymore. We have what I call sit and stew, because almost all of our stress is internal. You know, it's worried about the job or money, the government, the kids, you know, all of that. And I think that there's no physical response to that. And so it's really important to, even when we're talking about a CGM, if stress is an issue, if you're seeing those high numbers, go take a walk. Like, it's amazing how fast that will bring those numbers down.
I love that. And thank you for saying that. It's such a great, just easy to understand strategy, reminder, you know, so thank you.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
That's why we have so many people that love training with us, and you hear a lot of people say, oh, you know, exercise is my stress relief. So there is some truth to that, of people intuitively understand, like, oh, I just need to, like, get this out sometimes.
Yes, so I think it's the best. Yeah. The other thing I think about, you know, with stress, a little bit off topic, but I think it's important, is that so historically, that stress would hit, we'd have a response to it. If we survived it, we'd kind of go back to homeostasis and things would be cool for a while. Then we'd hit another stress, then it would resolve. But a lot of people today, like, the hits just keep on coming, you know, like there's no coming back to homeostasis. You're just in this chronic state of heightened stress response. And what will happen is that the hypothalamus will shut down the signaling to the adrenal glands. It's just like, we can't keep this high output of cortisol. And so the cortisol will eventually drop. So anybody who's in that heightened state is probably really low in cortisol. And I think, that's an important thing to recognize as well in terms of blood sugar.
So how would that show up on a CGM in that way?
It probably wouldn't, but they would have a lot of symptoms like anxiety with fatigue.
Yeah.
Just that wired and tired kind of feeling. And I always describe it as that kind of stress, that unrelenting, 10 million balls in the air at one time, kind of carves this really deep groove into our psyche, into our performance. And it's really difficult to break without conscious, attention to it. There are some lovely herbs and amino acids that can really balance that, but you kind of have to actively break it. You can't just go, okay, stress is gone, because you're in a groove.
Yeah. So would you say that that's more in line with adrenal fatigue? In terms of how that shows up. I mean, I'm looking, not necessarily looking to name it, but to understand if people were to identify what's happening for them.
Yes. I mean, I don't necessarily think of adrenal fatigue anymore. That term has kind of been, it's no longer recognized that that's really what's going on, because it's really more brain-based. Really the brain that's shutting down the signaling. The adrenal glands are still operating. It's the brain that takes the hit there. So really working on actively changing the brain is where the focus has to go.
I appreciate that a lot. There is a thought that I had in there that I wanted to make sure to share, because it's kind of circles around into the insights that I think people will probably have. And that one of the things I'm really interested with the continued glucose monitor, and as it relates to stress, one of the things that we were talking about, Anne, is that I'm looking to see how meditation and mindfulness practices actually helps to stabilize blood sugar levels more on like an ongoing basis, and to do it under different circumstances, before meals, after meals, things of that nature. Also different breath work techniques, and seeing how that changes anything, if at all. But what you were sharing about with stressors, and like, let's say that for certain individuals, even coming from a PTSD standpoint, from either serving in the military or having a traumatic experience in childhood, whatever it might be, where they are triggered into that stress response, and how for one individual it might trigger that stress, but for someone else it wouldn't. And
all
so
that perception, right?
Yeah. So being able to, for your own information, if you are in an experience where you're experiencing something that is a trigger, or you're in a stressful environment, being able to see that on the CGM is so fascinating. So then you can kind of go, okay, well, how do I self-regulate? And then even looking at, what works for you, and being able to see that immediate impact of what that would look like.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, really powerful.
I'm also excited for wearing the CGMs for the next 2 weeks, because Shannon and I are at different areas in our cycles. And, it's one thing to read everything in textbooks, and another to actually experience it. So what we know is, technically in the luteal phase, you're more insulin resistant. And then in the follicular phase, we're more insulin sensitive. So I'm excited to see those changes. And then, I've always intuitively gone lower carb, higher fat before my period, and then higher carb, lower fat, from day one of menstruation to ovulation. So I also think, for women who are just interested in optimal everything, feeling good around different times of the month, and tweaking their training and nutrition, like, this data is going to be invaluable.
I love that you guys love data as much as I do. You can, I think that there's so many apps that you can use, but then to kind of like integrate all of that understanding is so powerful. It's great.
Yeah.
We are very excited. You're also very excited that you like data.
I'm crazy. That's why I love lab testing, because it's just all about the data and the change and, the improvement. So I think it's all good.
It's so great to be able to see that way. And then to be able to communicate to others and to introduce them to why it's so important for being an advocate for their own health and longevity of their own health in that way. So this is very, very cool. Let's talk about what this course is going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So as I think about it, like who could benefit from really using a CGM and coming to understand how their glucose metabolism is? I think anybody and everybody could really benefit from this. Definitely somebody who has had any kind of imbalanced numbers on a blood test. This would be really great to determine where that imbalance lies and how to address it. So, for example, if you're fasting glucose, which is almost the only marker that conventional medicine runs, right, is a fasting glucose. By the time that becomes imbalanced, there's definitely other things going on. Like the body will regulate, the kidneys regulate fasting glucose, and they hold on for a long, long time. So it's more likely that you would see an imbalance in the hemoglobin A1C or even in an insulin level before you would see that change in fasting glucose. So when I run blood chemistries, I run all three. I'm looking at fasting glucose, insulin levels, and a hemoglobin A1C, because I want to identify this early and address it. So anybody who's had any imbalances like that would be a really great candidate to just determine, where's that coming from? What are the foods that I'm eating that are driving that? Secondly, would be anybody who experiences sugar cravings or crashes. Like if they go too long without a meal and they just know that, I have to eat, you can feel yourself fading. So I was telling you that when I did glucose tolerance tests, that was a very common phenomenon at that 3-hour mark. I could usually tell when people were going to be low, because I had a professional glucometer. So I would poke their finger and test their blood every hour, throughout the 4 hours. And some people would start sweating. Some people would have a headache. Some people get shaky. Some people would feel nauseated. So those are kind of the signals that people get, or they just get crabby. They're just like, moody and hangry, and they know they need to eat something. So anybody that has that would really benefit from really determining, how can I put a meal together where I don't experience that, where my blood sugar stays more stable. So optimal glucose for me is, between like 80 to 90. That's really good regulation fasting. And so, as you, in a glucose tolerance test, you drink this horrible drink and then you measure your glucose over the next 4 hours. So this one guy, he was just a mess at 3 hours. And when I finally took his blood and tested him, his glucose level was 30. Like he was so, I don't even know how he was even conscious, because it was like, and I aborted it right then. I'm like, we're done. Here's the nuts, like there's no point in taking this for another hour. So anybody who has sugar cravings or feels like they crash if they go too long without a meal would definitely benefit from this. And I think then there are people like us that just, really want to be as healthy as we can be. Athletes that want to know how to fuel before and after workouts. Glucose testing is going to help you determine how best to fuel for you. So I really feel like anybody and everybody could benefit from this experience. One of the things that I love about the company that we use for the glucose monitor is that once you have done this for a month, if anybody decides that they want to continue, you can go ahead and reorder. I think it's, there's great value in that, like doing it every few months just to kind of see, hey, where am I? Especially if you clean it up while you have the monitor on, and then you go off the monitor, it's like out of sight, out of mind. You kind of maybe go back to your old ways. It would be good to kind of, see where you are a few months later. Or maybe you're just like super intent on dialing it into perfection. Like I'm that way, like I want my glucose to be super stable. So yeah, I think anybody could benefit.
I agree. And I really appreciate that you shared the last group of people or who this can be for. I've had a couple people interested, and they've shared with me, well, I'm not pre-diabetic. I don't have any chronic thing that I'm working with. And my response was, you don't have to.
Right.
Literally just gaining insight into the deeper workings of your body. And then with that, what's affecting you as a specific individual, not because someone else told you or because you read it somewhere, but you're learning to take responsibility for what's actually occurring from the choices that you're making. So
without a doubt, it's just so interesting how we're all so biochemically unique. I've had people that half a piece of bread would, just send their blood sugar soaring, or some people can eat beans, and some people beans just don't work at all. So even healthy foods can spike our glucose, and like there's no way to know unless you test.
Yes. One thing that I'll share, because I think whoever is listening, when they are listening, I think it's helpful to like hear some of these things that we're discovering already. I had thought before that maybe oatmeal might spike my blood sugar levels a little bit more than granola. However, that's not the case. I thought that because of how I would feel afterwards. So I always will pair cottage cheese or egg white or Greek yogurt with either granola or whole rolled oats. So what I found is that the whole rolled oats do not spike blood sugar as much, regardless if I'm pairing them with whatever it might be. And I thought that was interesting. And then when I added a little bit of pecans to it for healthy fat, then it really helped to regulate my blood sugar level. So I'm kind of testing every day to go, okay, so when I have oatmeal and granola, it's a little bit of a spike. I'm hungry pretty fast afterwards. If I have oatmeal and cottage cheese, then it's better. If I have oatmeal, cottage cheese, and pecans, then it's even better, satiated, don't have to eat for 3.5, 4 hours.
So good. That's so great. So I, on the other hand, what I would have oatmeal with nuts and seeds and a protein shake, and I would still spike. So, that for me doesn't work. So you just never know. Lisa, what have you discovered?
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking like we might have to send all of our clients to this program, because it's such a game changer for understanding for each person, how it impacts blood sugar. I've always known that I've been fairly sensitive to carbs intuitively. I also had pre-diabetic markers in my 20s. I had gestational diabetes with both my kids. And so I've just always carbs have always been a trigger food for me since forever. I just always remember binge eating on them as a kid. And so once like learning about macronutrients and nutrition, I still had this like massive carb phobia, but just played around with different types of carbs and more, less processed, more fiber, always felt better intuitively in my body. But what I'm finding recently is it doesn't matter. It's like any carb I'm eating right now is just like, pew, pew, pew. And it's just fascinating. I'm also a day behind Shannon. So I'm kind of like, okay, I'm just going to be in the discovery mode and see if it's just still calibrating. I'm also going to be super nerdy and get the finger prick test if I can. I don't know if you can do that over the counter, but just to double check and be like, okay, how close is this reading to a prick test? And then really find out what might be causing those spikes when I do have carbs. I've definitely done keto, like higher fat, lower carb before, and loved it. Just felt just like this across the board. But when I ended up switching back to more carbohydrates, less fat, because we strength train. So that's where I might be the weird guinea pig student of yours of like, I don't know, does this diet match like my training? And, you know, what's the middle ground that will satisfy like all the different buckets?
Yeah, so I think your work is to test lots of different starches, you know, like root vegetables sometimes are better than, you know, like a grain. So play with that, and then play with quantity. Can I have a half a cup? Can I have a quarter cup? Like, and with what? Like in terms of the fat and the fiber, and then see if you can really dial that in.
Yeah, so far it's like 20 grams of carbs is about my max, which is fascinating.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're doing this.
Me too. Me too.
We're going to have so much to talk about. I'm so excited for the class. I think we're going to wrap up for now. So,
Okay.
For those of you who are listening and you want to learn more about what we're doing with the CGM class, make sure to go to thegreendoorlife.com/classes. And then if you want to find out more about Anne and Anne's work specifically, Anne, do you want to share your website URL?
Sure. It's pivotalhealthcollective.com.
Beautiful. And we will add these into the comments section or the information on all of the places that we will be posting this. So you'll be able to find it there as well. And we just hope you guys have enjoyed this, that you've learned a little bit more about how you can become an advocate for your own health and really kind of take this into your own hands, and that there's resources out here where you don't have to just shoot in the dark and try to figure this stuff out, or let your CGM that you purchased because you thought it was cool just collect dust on a counter somewhere. So thank you so much, Anne and Lise, of course.
Thank you too. Look forward to the class.
Yes.
Us as well. And we have our free masterclass as an introduction coming up. Lise, what's that date?
April 18th.
Yes.
Very much. And then
April
that will be
at 11 a.m. Pacific.
Thank you, Anne. And that will lead us right into our month-long full CGM course with Anne Fischer. And we're so excited for it.
Me too. Thank you both.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.